Hello and welcome to a sleepy episode of the Brew Hoop podcast. I'm Adam Paris, co-managing editor of brewhoop.com, recuperating after this long, incredibly never-ending week of West Coast games for the Milwaukee Bucks with their late tip times, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock on the East Coast out here. I'm joined by Riley Feldman today. Kyle Carr can't join us as he's dealing with the arrival of his new son, Sterling. Congratulations to Kyle, and I can't even imagine how much sleepier he is than us, Riley.
Yeah, the usual weekly inside baseball, he was sending us messages at 3 a.m. and it sounded like not a complete disaster, but not a situation I envy him being in. So totally understandable why he's not here this morning. And hopefully our dulcet tones when he's listening to the podcast later will help lull him to sleep, though I'm sure he won't need our help to get there.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. Well, it's been a couple weeks since we recorded. Certainly things have carried on as per usual for the Milwaukee Bucks. Plenty of wins while also dropping a couple games that we can certainly talk about. I can't remember if we haven't recorded before Christmas, and I can't remember whether we were talking smack about the Sixers. Pretty sure I did. And
100%.
Yeah,
100%. I deleted the podcast immediately as soon as it got to halftime. I was like, we're just going to delete that and pretend that never happened again. Which I think it's good that we're somewhat a smaller podcast because that means any takes we make here, it like reaches dozens of people, and those are the only people who know what kind of like idiots we make ourselves out to be. So that that podcast did not age well, no. Like most podcasts, it seems.
Yeah, that is true. Aged quite horribly, especially by halftime. Tried my hardest to make things turn around at half. Rally hat, all those kind of things, but just didn't work out. But anything else from the past couple of weeks, Riley? Any holiday highlights you wanted to share?
Not too much. So we were back in Southeast Wisconsin, and that was fine. We were there for like a week, which gave me enough time to see pretty much everybody. The one highlight that I do have is Catherine, my wonderful fiance. She did get me a concise atlas, and it's the complete opposite of concise. Things got to weigh like 20 some odd pounds. I was really big into the atlas that I had as a kid, and so for a long time she had apparently considered that as like a secret gift to go for, so it was awesome for her to give me for Christmas. So besides that, it's just kind of been cold as hell here in Minneapolis, and whatever, Bucks winning. So those are my highlights. How about you?
Yeah, pretty similar. Drove down to Charleston, as I said before. Was with my wife's family, hung out with them. Interestingly, one of my wife's cousins had fireworks, and they live on a golf course, so we went out Christmas night and shot some fireworks off. Never done that on Christmas before, so that was interesting. And
Jesus would have done the same, so it feels right.
Yeah, yes, 100%. They were shooting bottle rockets above the manger, and yeah. But then I don't know. New Year's Day is I don't know if New Year's Day is a big thing. I always liked it because I had football and stuff, but New Year's Day is like a huge thing in Philadelphia. They have a parade that lasts all day. You can drink openly in the streets. I know it sounds like you can do that all the time out here.
I was going to say, was that really all that different from all the other days of the year?
It's this one is a true day where the cops are out and they're watching this huge parade that's going on. So that was a fun day as per usual. Had people over and then went and hung out and watched the parade. But other than that, not a whole lot. And seemingly business as per usual for the Milwaukee Bucks as well. I think we're going to cover some of the games that we may have missed from the past couple of weeks, but most importantly, we're going to discuss this past week's slate of games, which started, of course, with the 126-104 loss against the San Antonio Spurs. That was, of course, coming after the Milwaukee Bucks were able to beat the Spurs in the Fiserv Forum the Saturday previously. This one was a difficult one to watch almost from the start. The San Antonio Spurs were incredibly hot from deep in sort of the continuing trend of what we've seen from when the Milwaukee Bucks lose this year. Bucks don't shoot very well from deep. Their opponent has it really, really going. Spurs shoot 19 of 35, 54.3% from deep. Bucks shoot only 33.3% from deep, which really isn't that bad overall, not too far below their season average, but the Bucks are only 40% overall. Giannis, 24 points, 12 rebounds, 8 assists, so a decent game for him, but you could tell that the Spurs were queuing in on him quite acutely. Chris Middleton, just 5 of 16 from the floor. Eric Bledsoe, weirdly, just 2 for 7 from the floor after looking really aggressive the Saturday previously against the Spurs. Riley, I want to open it up by talking about the San Antonio loss and then also maybe tag team it with that Philadelphia loss. Not that they were exactly the same. I think the Philadelphia loss seemed more I don't know, overwhelmingly destructive by the 76ers. They seemed to just take the Bucks completely out of their game. The Bucks looked out of their game, but maybe not to the same level against the Spurs. So what did you sort of notice from either that Spurs game or the Sixers game that stood out to you in terms of the Bucks not able to achieve the kind of success they've had thus far?
So the biggest thing that jumped out to me is it seems in both the Philly and the San Antonio game, to a certain extent, both of the opponents included some form of the quote unquote wall, like the nebulous wall that we're going to talk about until the sun explodes. The fact that it seems like the thing is, almost every team has an idea of what the blueprint is, and we'll see occasional teams like try to implement it. Like even the Trailblazers last night were like, okay, let's just throw 4 defenders at Giannis and see how it works. Unfortunately for them, they didn't have like the personnel, the length, the size to be able to stop him. But when you're playing a team like the Spurs, given how well coached they are, and they have a little bit of length and a little bit of size inside, which cannot be said for a lot of other teams. And of course, as we talked about previously with Philly, the fact like their size and length is what makes them a special defensive team, and that kind of showed through. And so what was the big uniting factor between the two was like, yes, the other team shot really, really well, but like, I mean, you don't lose by 22 by like, even if the Spurs had shot relatively average, that doesn't make up for the fact that the Bucks just could not get it going from 3 offensively, especially. And the same thing in the Sixers game where they shoot 40% from 3, which is pretty decent, but obviously the Sixers go 47.7%. And when you have a situation like that, it really just makes me worried because yes, opponents need like really outstanding shooting nights to really blow the doors off the Bucks, but these are both wins that were by pretty significant margins. And so even if the opponent shot just decent from 3 and they have the defensive plan to throw the Bucks off, we've seen it happen a couple of times. Now it doesn't happen all that often. They're 35-6, but that was what concerned me most, was the fact that we've seen 2 really well-coached teams, or I wouldn't say Philly's like a really well-coached, but decently coached and the right personnel to make it happen. And so you have to wonder, are we going to run into an opponent like the Sixers or somebody else who can implement that well enough to force the Bucks to keep the pressure up? And how did this team respond? And I think we can assure ourselves that Giannis is going to get his points, but everybody else is a little bit of a question mark on a game-to-game basis.
Yeah. All very valid points. I think the wall and the wall that you talk about is certainly a talking point that we've had many different times this year. The interesting thing, of course, when the Bucks don't have their 3-point shot falling in that Spurs game, if you just look at their percentage of shots, they were shooting more from 3 and basically siphoning off. They were shooting a few more percentage of shots from the mid-range, then also siphoning their shots off that they would typically have at the rim and putting those towards 3-point land, which makes a lot of sense given that's sort of what the Spurs game plan was. So the numbers bear that out. The plan was to put the wall up, sort of deter the Bucks from being able to get in there and try and finish over their length, or even try and attempt shots at the rim. It's essentially what the Bucks are doing defensively as well, try and deter teams from doing that and then siphon out the shots from 3-point land. So a successful strategy from that standpoint. But I think where it really gums up what the Bucks like to do is, if it's just so hard when players aren't hitting shots, I would say also in quick succession. I think we've seen that before when the Bucks are able to get sort of a torrential downpour of threes. You can kind of feel like that wall is going to soften up. But when it's just sort of in drips and drabs over the whole extent of the game, it's kind of hard for Giannis and Eric Bledsoe to feel like that inside is softening, like there's a softer underbelly for them to be able to penetrate and go in and create good looks for their teammates. Because I think, case in point, Eric Bledsoe taking only 7 shots is pretty ridiculous, considering how well he played that game prior against San Antonio. And of course, DeJounte Murray was back, so that's part of it. Significantly better maybe not significantly better, but better defender than Derek White. But I think that concerned me quite a bit, because it was sort of that playoff blueprint, right, where Eric Bledsoe just kind of becomes a non-factor. It's Giannis trying to do it all on himself, and if Chris Middleton isn't hitting, then it's gonna lead to disaster.
Yeah, and I think what's most interesting about this regular season so far, in my opinion, is, and I'm gonna continue to harp on this because this was my first media experience. So this is like the inside info that I got. But when I did the Magic game, before the game, Mike Budenholzer said that they like 70 to 80% of their possessions are just like he trusts the players to do it. Essentially, like it's free flow. And I think even last night, Zora Stevenson was talking about the fact that he trusts like Giannis and the vets to be coaches on the floor, essentially. But the issue is like, yes, the system is there, but like you said, for Giannis, it's like if his teammates aren't hitting, all credit to him, he still tries to make it happen to get passes out. So it's not like he's like just totally eschewing everything his teammates are doing, but so much of it is like his one move is to lower his shoulder and run into a group of dudes, which is like really oddly effective, which is what makes him so special. But that's got to be hard on him physically, and it, like we've talked about before, if that's going to be the plan time after time, like he's getting up 22 shots where, 5 of them are threes. It's a lot better this season than it was previously, but where so many of his shots, and because he's taking so many of them, are within the paint. If it's just going to be Giannis decides as the coach on the floor that he's going to lower his shoulder and try to make it happen because his teammates are doing it, then that's just going to be a recipe for disaster. Now, as we said, not every team is going to have even the personnel to stop him, which is why even when the Bucks are shooting poorly in games, like for example, they shot 22% against the Warriors, which is from 3, I should say, which is amazing. And then against the Kings, they only shoot 25.6% as well. So even when they shoot poorly, if it's against a poor team, they have enough talent elsewhere to just like, it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. So I think that's what's not concerning, but what's interesting about being 35-6 is there's still some aspects underneath the surface that are like, well, is this something to keep an eye on? Is that really something to worry about? And I think it is something to genuinely kind of be concerned about, but it's tough to really put it in context because the team is still playing so well because the system works relatively, but it makes it tough for Giannis, and God knows if he's dealing with back issues, how they're dealing with that. And there's a lot of confluence events, which makes things a little wishy-washy right now, on both sides of the court, really.
Yeah, I think we'll touch on this later. We're going to talk a little bit about the team at this halfway point of the season, some of our feelings on them, compared in contrast to last year's, projecting forward to the playoffs and that kind of stuff. One more thing I want to talk about, well, the Spurs are sort of uniquely suited to take advantage of this Bucks defense, given the fact that they're just a team of elite mid-range shooters.
Yeah, I was going to say, DeMar DeRozan, come on down, please.
I mean, like, thank God that he's not getting traded or whatever to some sort of team. He was just able to cook the entire game. The Bucks didn't want to adapt what they were doing that whole performance. But it's interesting though in that way, because you think about strategically, these Spurs have this roster that I don't know why they built it this way. It's weird that they built it this way, but like realistically, it is built to take advantage of what the Bucks are giving up. And then the Philadelphia Sixers, in another example, is a team that seems, especially based on what's been happening since they beat the Bucks, like a team built exactly to beat the Milwaukee Bucks and stop Giannis at what he wants to do. And I think we saw that I would say maybe this was the best example of Joel Embiid's ability to actually stop Giannis, which, Giannis had 52 against the Sixers last year, and that was a huge breakout game. But realistically, Riley, Embiid owned Giannis at the rim in that Christmas Day game. And you could tell that Giannis did not look like himself.
Yeah, it was ugly. Now, thank goodness we didn't come out after the game. Giannis was like, yeah, my back was sore. Like, I didn't come up with some sort of excuse for it. I think the one thing that's not weird about the Philly game, and I wonder, in your opinion, and just kind of thinking about it generally, if Eric, because he was out that game, obviously, I think, was he still dealing with the rib issue then, or was that the leg?
I believe so.
Whatever injury he had, so he wasn't available. And I would be curious to see, and we saw last year, I mean, he wasn't available after 4 minutes into the late season game against the Sixers either because he got ejected. But I would be curious. You're right that I'd have to look at the roster that Philly ran out last year versus this year, but because Embiid is so big, and we even saw this against Gobert as well, Giannis eventually figures it out, but the first matchup against a really big dude, and when it's a team full of really big dudes, and he's essentially the only creating option, especially in the paint, that makes things nigh impossible. And yes, maybe it was a little bit injury, but it was like you said, uniquely set up for everybody to key up on Giannis, because when you have Chris out there, Brooke out there, Wes out there, Dante's like sort of a slasher, but I wouldn't say he's necessarily a guy who drives to the paint. And obviously the other three guys, they just kind of keep out. So when that's going to be the case, yeah, I mean, you know exactly what Giannis is going to do every single time, and that makes life a lot easier for Joel. So I'd be curious to see in the next game, if Eric is available as well, how much that changes, because when they go big like that, it feels like a situation where Eric could take advantage, but like Josh Richardson, if he stays on Eric, maybe that just nullifies that. So you're right that they're almost uniquely designed to be really difficult to beat, especially for the way the Bucks play, and especially if the Bucks don't really have many other options. Like, or if it's just going to be 70 to 80% of the same exact thing, then yeah, you're going to have problems, and obviously that showed through in that game.
Yeah, and I believe I can't remember if it's this month or next month, but I think it's next month. But the Bucks face the Sixers. I'm just looking at the schedule here. I believe they face the Sixers twice. Yeah, in the span of basically 2 weeks. So, well, I think we'll get it's nice that we're able to face them 4 times this year as opposed to the 3.
Usual 3. Yeah.
Yeah. So we really get a lot of examples, and we should have a good amount of data to go off on. Should these teams meet in the playoffs? It's weird how Philly's been, and of course Joel Embiid is out now, but then Philly, like right after this win, went on some weird stretch of games where they kept losing in true Philly fashion.
Yeah, like how much do you? This is the thing, because I don't watch a lot of Sixers games. There's a lot of opponents that I don't watch a lot of the games of, but I'm curious how much of it is like lackadaisical, or they just don't give a damn because, you know, whatever, it's a team full of dudes who don't really give a damn, or if they only get up for like big games, which if that's the case, that's obviously still going to be a problem, because if you're facing the playoffs, every game's a big game. But they're like the exact situation where, yes, they played really out of their minds, but it would not be totally unrealistic for them to not play as out of their minds, but still give the Bucks enough fits where it's a close series throughout. And to me, that would be like a toss-up. After one game, we'll see after whatever the next 2 or 3 whether or not I change my tune. But it definitely was a concerning performance all around, right on national TV, to get pants like that.
Yeah, that was tough to take. Well, let's
wait.
talk
When the game was happening, was everybody? So you have it worse because you're in Philly. Was everybody around you like ashamed for you, or were you in the corner like desperately trying not to scream? Because that's what I was doing. I was like, every couple of seconds I would look at it, I was like, oh God, okay. I try to play it off really cool, like it wasn't that big of a deal, but I was dying inside the entire time.
Yeah, thankfully, I was surrounded by Bucks fans. I didn't have to watch it with any Phillies fans or Sixers fans, so that was a Christmas treat. And it was tough because this was the game where I told my wife to bet $50 on it, and I said,
"Yes, the betting update thing."
I was like, "Please, you got to put $50 down." I mean, this is just a bet. It's a guaranteed bet. I know we're going to destroy them, and yeah, that was really tough because it wasn't even close. Like it just wasn't close from halftime. We kept being like, "Oh, what if we get it down to single digits?" And
they got it. They got it to like within 12 in the final 3 minutes. Is like, well, don't call it a comeback. Here we go. It did not happen. No.
Yeah. So that's all right though. Still had a good Christmas. I guess that's what really matters.
That is what matters.
All right. Well, let's talk about a couple of the other games. We'll touch on briefly before we do a sort of overarching conversation about the season at large. To this point, Bucks also start their West Coast road trip. Then, after losing in San Antonio, they go out to California, take on the Golden State Warriors, and they won 107-98. Giannis had 30 points, 13 rebounds. Middleton had 21 points, 6 of 16 from the field. I will fully admit I did not stay up for this game. Apologies to Bucks Nation. It sounds like if there is any game for me to not stay up for, this was it though, based on all reports.
Yeah, I was 100% also right there with you. I was in bed at 10 o'clock straight up. I was like, okay, I'm just going to hope they win. And I'd wake up the next morning to find out it was a close run affair, which I don't know if that's a function of the Bucks just not caring. I mean, clearly it wasn't Draymond Green, greatest player of all time, going 1 of 7 from the field.
Oh, but okay.
Everybody else, I mean, whatever. It's again another situation where the Bucks can play poorly. They can shoot 22% from 3, but because it's a really crappy opponent for the most part. I mean, whatever, no disrespect to those guys, but just given the roster they have available, whatever, they kind of just lackadaisical around and still win either way. So whatever, it's your usual beating up on a crappier team essentially.
Yeah, good on the Bucks for taking care of business and I mean, the Warriors shoot almost 40% from three. That keeps them in the game, and the Bucks are able to get to the free throw line. That keeps them in the game. And then, I mean, the Warriors, I don't know, Warriors can have given other teams fits too. They were just took it to the wire against the Clippers the other night, beat the Rockets on Christmas Day. So, that's just it's part of when you're going on a 4-game road trip, you're going to have some of these hiccups. But surprisingly, the next two weren't really hiccups at all. The Bucks go on and win 127-106 against the Kings, and then the second game of a back-to-back, they go up on Saturday evening 122-101 win against the Portland Trail Blazers. Let's talk first about that Kings game, Riley. Lowest point total output of the season for Giannis, 13 points to go along with 10 rebounds and 5 assists. Sort of the team is buoyed by the efforts of Eric Bledsoe, 24 points, 10 of 17 from the field, and Chris Middleton, 27 points, 9 of 12 from the field, 11 rebounds, 4 assists. I do want to mention Dante got his career high.
I was going to say, I hope this gets up. I'm going to highlight if he doesn't.
Yes, no, I think it's time for Dante's Inferno. Career high for Dante DiVincenzo, 18 points, still lower than Rashad Vaughn's career high. And
we have time to fix it, though. We still have time.
I was excited about it, and then I think I saw something come across Twitter. I think it was probably from some Kings blogger who was like, it was someone had talked about Dante's career high, and then he was like, add Dante to the list of 50 other role players who have gotten their career high against the Kings. So that made me a little less excited about it, but still good to see Dante go off for that one.
Yeah, I think with the key, as you were saying here, really all the other players, it's whatever. It's the fact that Dante, and I would have to relook at all the previous games, but somehow going 4 of 6 from 3. I mean, it looked like he forgot how to shoot completely for a couple weeks there. It was the definition of touch and go. So good on Dante. Plus he gets the 3 rebounds, 1 assist, 3 steals. I mean, I have no idea what the quote unquote value of a steal is. Obviously it's a good thing to take the ball away from an opponent, and it really depends on whether or not you convert on the other end, but it's really strange. Like how much of it is he just senses things versus I see him multiple times a game where if like the opposing team is coming in transition, even if they're just kind of slow walking it up, he will try to like jump the passing lanes all the time. Like he'll take one step and if it doesn't come, okay, then I'll back off. And I think the fact that he's able to recover from that so routinely and still not be a total liability on defense, it's really impressive. However, we should note that he's been shooting like 24% from 3 over the last 10 games, and I'd have to relook at what his season percentage is. So really the key with Dante, as it was last season and the start of this season, is whether or not he can develop a jump shot. Seemed like we had figured it out for a little bit there. He's down to 32.8% from 3, which isn't too bad. You could hope for a couple more percentage points up, but whatever. Good on him to step up and kind of break the malaise that he had been in the past couple of games.
Yeah, it was certainly a good time for him to break out of that slump. The Kings game was odd. I mean, it was good to see Chris Middleton kind of get going from mid-range. Eric Bledsoe kind of spanking the Kings in terms of that point guard matchup.
Yeah.
With De'Aaron Fox. I thought this game was very aesthetically pleasing. I don't know what it was, but I thought the Bucks put together some of like my favorite. They have tons of great passing sequences this whole year, but it felt like they were really, really had it going in terms of there were a couple like really awesome transition plays where they make this first pass and then it leads to 4 other extra passes. They've been doing that all year, but it felt like they really found their rhythm against the Kings, and this one didn't really ever seem in doubt. It felt like they had a handle on this one from the tip.
Yeah, I thought actually, I agree generally, but that second quarter was such typical as well. Like this was the microcosm the entire season. You're right that they had a really good passing night. There were a lot of times where, if Giannis isn't out there dominating the ball, which, it's no big deal. It's Giannis. He can dominate the ball if he wants. But when everybody else has the ball, especially in the Kings game, there's a lot of like making the extra pass or kind of swinging it around the perimeter, which we don't see nearly as often as I think they should probably do. But that's whatever. That's a discussion for another day. But we see in that second quarter, this is the issue, right? Like you have a lot of sub lineups, and you have George Hill, who plays okay. He like 9 points. Like he just does George Hill things, 6 assists. But all the other guys, like Wes Matthews is out there. He goes 0 for 6. Brook Lopez out there, 0 for 5 from 3. Pat Connaughton, 0 for 4 from 3. Kyle Korver, 0 from 2 for 3. So like, yes, they had built up enough of a lead where even though they let the Kings get right back in it, they were able to put Chris and Eric back out there, and they were both really, really hot. And obviously that's just kind of is what the difference is. But I thought it was indicative, almost like the Spurs and the Sixers game, but to a lot lesser of an extent, but like almost every other game where you'll have the occasional time where the role players aren't playing really well. And I wonder once we get to the playoffs, like how much of a factor is that going to play in? Because if we have these guys ostensibly here, like, oh, they're going to hit shots. They're just going to hit shots. Like, okay. And if they're not hitting shots, then what the hell are we going to do? So I thought they did a really good job adjusting in the second half and just kind of blowing whatever, they only outscored the whatever Kings by I think 12 in the second half. So it wasn't like this really great defensive effort. It was really good offensive end from them. So I thought it was just, like I said, a little bit of a microcosm of the season where there were things to be happy about and other things was like, we can chalk it up. It's whatever, one game out of 82. But when you kind of continue to see it from guys who are going to be ostensibly playing a big role in the playoffs, it's just something to kind of keep an eye on.
It's a great point. And, when you think about the playoffs projecting forward, I mean, Bud loves to lean on these super sub lines.
Oh, he loves it.
We did it. We saw him do it all year last year. We saw him not really waver from his type of minute total for Giannis. Even in the playoffs, obviously he upped it, but he wasn't really willing to go above 40 minutes. And when these games come down to, if there's a 2-minute sequence where your team gets -8 from the floor because George Hill isn't hitting shots and Dante DiVincenzo, God love him, really doesn't shoot that well, your team's going to be in a hole, and it's going to be tough for you to recover from that kind of stuff. So I'm glad you brought that up. That second quarter kind of standing out is something we should certainly use as a lens to view the rest of the season through. But then this 122-101 win against Portland, really a dominating performance from the big three. Giannis, Middleton, and Bledsoe combined for 91, 32, 30, and 29 respectively. Portland shoots just 27.8% from 3, 10 of 36. Essentially don't have a center the entire night, Riley. Anthony Tolliver, God love him, the old man.
Still get minutes out here.
I've said it before, I'll say it again. This man has had to gotten destroyed by Giannis so many times, and he continues to go out there and play. And I salute him for his effort. But it was quite clear that Eric Bledsoe could get whatever he wanted inside. Same with Giannis.
Well, so you said the big three. I think we need to give a shout out. It's the big four this game. I think it's time for Dante's Inferno. Oh, we already did that segment. Now Dante, the only other guy got into double digits with scoring, so he gets 10 points. Want to give another shout out to Dante? No,
we'll play the tag again.
Yes, please do. Yeah. So, so against the Trailblazers, you're right that it was totally up to the big three, and like I said, or like you said, like I said earlier on, it was like they were just in a tough spot, the Trailblazers, because I think Hassan Whiteside, he's got like illness, I'm pretty sure. Like he's dealing with sickness. Obviously, Yusuf Nurkic, like his leg broke into 80 parts last year, so he's still recovering from that. So when your like tallest guys, like you said, Tolliver or like whatever Carmelo Anthony's doing on the defensive end besides cussing really loudly while grabbing rebounds, like it's just going to be tough. And you saw it time and time again where this is like the exact perfect situation for Giannis and Eric, where the opponent just doesn't have the size to be able to really stop them. And like Giannis, every single time down, they could throw 4 dudes at him, but it felt like, how many fouls so 20 fouls for the Trailblazers. It felt like the Bucks had 1,000,000,001s in this game. Like it was just, there was, whether it be just not swiping at the guys hard enough, or really just how strong Giannis and Eric are to be able to get through all that and still convert time after time after time. And then on top of that, in both the Kings game and the Trailblazers game, we should give a shout out to Chris Middleton. Like he's been really, really on fire these past couple of weeks, and it's not even doing anything really outside of the ordinary for him. It's just his usual bevy of like, okay, I'm just gonna do a lot of ISO moves, a lot of little like dribble drives or dribble moves here, and just get the guy just a little bit of space and convert the mid-ranger time and time again, which when he's doing that makes life a lot easier for everybody else. So it was like the typical big three game. And unfortunately for, Damian Lillard and company, just not enough help from the rest of the roster. Like they ran out a lot of guys. That's kind of been the issue for the Blazers. Like they're just kind of shallow. And when you have to give Carmelo Anthony 33 minutes, like maybe he's not super duper washed, but he's not the Carmelo Anthony of previously. So it's just a tough situation for them, and the Bucks took advantage of it.
Yeah, 100%. When you look at I mean, they just don't have the length after losing like Mo Harkless and Farouk Aminu. They just do not have the bodies in the front court without Zach Collins and Hassan Whiteside and any of that sort of length to try and go up against the Bucks. I mean, that's why Chris Middleton can cook as much as he wants against the likes of, Hazonia and Jalen Horde. I don't even know who that is.
Didn't know he was in the league, but that's all right.
The Warriors game was the ultimate, because they haven't been very good. I looked at it. I felt awful for how few players I even knew on their roster. Like, it was really bad.
It feels like Omari Spellman has lived and died 6 careers already at this point. Like, that's one guy that wasn't he was a part of the Hawks, right?
Yeah, he was. I think he ripped the Bucks apart in a summer league game once.
It sounds about right. Actually, so talking about guys that we haven't really heard of, or in the Bucks case, we haven't heard from all that often. We should just circle back real quick to the Kings game as well. Give a shout out to Sterling Brown.
Great point.
Didn't play for what felt like, again, weeks. He's just kind of been really jerked around a lot, it seems, with his minute distribution. So he comes in the third quarter again, like we said, after that second is like, not that great. He comes in, he ends up in 18 minutes, gets a double-double, 11 points and 12 rebounds. Like, it was the most typical Sterling Brown game on both ends of the floor, which was, I think, in a positive sense. And I'd be curious what his rebounding percentages are, because for a wing of his size, he gobbles up a lot of them. But just want to give a shout out to Sterling. And then he doesn't, scored nearly as much against the Trailblazers, but he seems to have earned another 13 minutes, even if it took Bud until like deep into the third quarter to bring him out. So shout out Sterling.
Yeah, I think they said that was his first double-double ever.
Yeah, which seems strange. I thought it would be like he's gotten minutes before, which I don't know if that's a condemnation of him or the role he plays or what, but I would have figured he would have gotten a double-double like some point last year, or even like there was time during the kid era where he was playing quite a bit. So that was interesting, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. And also, he was. I'm glad you brought up. He was a shot in the arm in that third quarter. Really brought the Bucks when they were faltering just a little bit, and Bud needed a little bit of different energy in there. He was all over the court defensively. Putting him and Dante out there at the same time defensively is very menacing for another team, because Dante has some insanely quick feet. There were some possessions last night where he was just right in a dude's jersey against the Blazers, and just an absolutely insane job of contesting shots and sticking with guys, considering the amount of dribble drive moves they have.
Yeah, it's interesting because like both, you're right, they're both like really menacing when they're both out there, but they're like almost in slightly different ways, because Sterling, he's got like the physicality almost and the length to be able to, but for Dante, you're right that even if he quote unquote like gets blown by, he's able to keep up enough to force an opponent to pick up the dribble. And then he has the ability, you saw it against the Kings multiple times, where like the ball handler has to pick up the dribble and they're going to try and pass out, and he sticks a hand exactly where they're going to try and go, because once you're stuck on the baseline, there's only so many options you can realistically go to for a lot of players to pass out. And yet, or Dante, I should say, seems to have a pretty good handle on which lanes those are. And again, there's a reason why he's getting so many damn steals, because it's not so much physically, like, yes, he can keep up through picks and everything, but that's all about Dante. He just does stuff like when he hopefully it's a long time from now, but on that tombstone, it's just say Dante DiVincenzo, rest in peace. He did stuff. And on the defensive end, more than even on the offensive end, I think it shows through often, which is refreshing given some of the defense we've seen some guards in the past. And good for Dante. Thank goodness for Dante.
Yeah, we'll let Dante play us out as we take a quick break here, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about taking the temperature of the Bucks at this halfway point of the 2019-20 season, and then move on to our quick potpourri that'll take us out to the rest of the show. So stay tuned. All right, we are back. Riley, it's the halfway point of the season. The Bucks are on pace for, did you know this? They're on pace for 70 wins. And it's time for us to talk about how we're feeling about them to this point. I have a couple of different topics I want to touch on here, but I want to start it off with a very simple question. Do you feel better or worse about this Bucks team in terms of their championship potential than at this time last year?
God, can I be a hot take artist? I guess I'm going to have to be a hot take artist. I think I mean, we're talking it's like hairs a percentile, but I would say maybe slightly worse. And my rationale for that is one, last season was a huge breakout year. Like we had no real idea, not what to expect, but the way that they played last year was like this feels like the year to be. And so far through this season, to me, what's the biggest concern is when I look up and down the roster, I'm trying to see what did we add or change last season in terms of personnel and which guys are playing above their averages, which guys are playing below, and like how does that translate into the playoffs. So if we look, because we already saw last season, there was a team. Like yes, the Raptors were really good. Obviously they won the championship, all credit to them, but we've seen that there are teams who can trip up the Bucks if they play things right, if they have the right personnel and coaching, which to their credit, there's not a lot of teams that do that, but in the playoffs, there are going to be more of them. And so when I'm looking at the roster here, like just, the starting five, okay. Wes Matthews has been okay. Over the past 10, he's been kind of washed, but defensively, he's still okay. Eric Bledsoe, I think he's playing like Eric Bledsoe does, which is really good in the regular season, but like we've said, he switches off at times, and that's a problem. Chris Middleton, I think he's obviously having a career year, so that's one where it's like, okay, he's doing a lot better. Giannis is doing a lot better, or at least matching a lot of his numbers from last season. Whether or not he's a back injury, that's a question. But then, I think the only other guys that really jump out is like George Hill playing out of his mind. How long does that last? And Dante, again, come or go depending on how he's feeling. So when I'm looking at the roster and the way the Bucks play, there's not a lot about it that's radically different from last year. And they won 60 games last year, and they have every possibility to go ahead and blow right past that win total this season. And it seems like we have better veteran personnel to be able to answer any sort of slumps, but there are still times where like we're getting Ersan out there for 15 to 20 minutes. And there are times where opponents are just essentially blowing by him time after time on defense. There are times when Kyle Korver is out there and maybe he could be a 3-point spark plug, but if I'm an opponent, I'm picking on him all day long. Like we're just every single time we're trying to get him moving and totally just get right past him. And so there are good things and there are things where I'm still a little concerned, and I'm not sure if it's changed nearly enough where this is this whole new look that teams are just they can't stop us. And through the regular season, that seems to have been the case, but I'm curious when a team has time to plan for it, how well that's going to hold up. And again, another thing, Mike Budenholzer doesn't change a lot. Like he put together a really good system, and he does change eventually, but he takes forever to change. And there's something to be said about that for consistency and getting guys into position and giving them responsibility to make up decisions. But when you're in a tight series, is he going to be able to stop himself from playing Ersan 15 minutes, or is he going to double down, like you said? Or even if he does not want to play Ersan, is he all of a sudden going to go to DJ Wilson? I have my doubts about that. So I think there's a lot of questions still, even though the Bucks are really good this year. I would say I'm a little bit worse just because there are still a lot of good teams, and I think there's a lot of good teams with the personnel that could give them trouble, especially in the playoffs. That was a long-winded answer to say slightly worse, but I just wanted to justify my position.
No, I'm glad you did. I think I'm leaning the same way. I'm really glad you brought up that last point. It's one of the things I've been thinking a lot about. I think there was a piece this past week that I didn't get a chance to fully read, but it was talking about Nick Nurse's commitment to experimenting during the regular season.
That was a really good piece. The exact antithesis of Bud. So continue. Sorry.
Yes. Was there? You can do it in broad strokes if you want to. If there was something that stuck out to you about it, because I didn't get a chance to read it.
Yeah. So there was just a couple of quotes that stood out. It was more so like. So I'm going to keep hammering on it because I thought it was really interesting that Bud said that like 70 to 80%, he's not coaching, which maybe that's like a random number he plucked out, but that's probably generally how Bud approaches. Like he's relatively hands off when the game's going on and calling plays occasionally, where it was like Nick Nurse, his whole thing is like, we're just going to prepare. Like, even if it doesn't quote unquote work in the NBA, we're going to try these defensive schemes. We're going to try a slightly different approach for the players. And so if he's like, the players like they beg me to like switch over to these new things just so they can practice it, so that when the playoffs come around, like, okay, do we need to run a zone? We have experience running the zone in the regular season, like actual meaningful minutes. We can go to that. Do we want to play man? We could do that. Do we have our base defense? We can do that. And so like to me, it was like such a stylistic difference where Nick Nurse, yes, he runs his guys like into the ground a lot of minutes, but he's willing to experiment, even if it means trying to go back to concepts that have been quote unquote proven to not work in the NBA. It's like, let's get familiar with it because we don't have a lot of time to practice. And so the only time we're going to be able to do that is in the games. And if that means we struggle at times or we lose the occasional game, that's whatever, because come playoff time, we're going to at least be comfortable where if I call on you guys to suddenly run a zone, like that's not going to be a problem for you. You can just do that. Like, you know how to operate it. And for Bud, if it's like, one, I don't think they change anything defensively like during a game. Like, it's very rare. I don't know. I'm too X's and O dumb to really know, but it seems like it's pretty rare for them to really switch the defensive scheme, which to their credit, it works really well. But there's a reason teams get up like 50 billion 3-pointers on the Bucks. Like, that's just that's what they want to happen. And on offense, it's like if it's 80% of the possessions, just like the players are freestyling, like there's not a lot of room to run plays. And we've seen that come through on occasion where it's like, okay, we need a critical play here at the end of the game to try and tie or win. All right, Chris, why don't you just go run into that forest of dudes? We're going to try and pass it to you and see if you can. Like, that's the extent of our play calling on occasion. So I think you're right that Nick Nurse piece was really, I think it was CBS. Just Google it up if you're interested. I thought it was really interesting, the stylistic difference in coaching approach, which we saw last year. I mean, Nick Nurse beat Coach Bud in that series. Like, that's just what it was. And how many other opponent coaches do that? Open question, but there are other guys who do it. We have examples of it. And is that going to be a problem in the playoffs?
Fascinating to compare and contrast those two. Maybe part of it is Nick Nurse I know he had an interesting roundabout process and progression up to his way as a head coach. Not that nobody else does, but Bud was also in a place where he was entrenched for the better part of 2 decades.
Yeah,
with a coach overseeing him who has changed his style over the years, but does seem incredibly stuck in his own ways over what he believes that he wants to do. And I 100% agree about the defensive changes. Certainly, we've seen them at times. It felt like it caused like an insane riot last year when the Bucks finally brought out a little bit of switching. And it was like, wow,
oh my God, are they doing this right now? Oh my God.
But we see that stuff so rarely. And even if Bud can say all the time, yeah, it's the players, 70 to 80%. Like you said, that quote is really interesting. 70 to 80% is just the players out there. But if it's just the players, I mean, part of it is you're not experimenting with the players at all. You're using the same sort of players game after game. And who knows when you might need a guy. That's another thing that Nick Nurse would do. He would try out really different lineups, see how things fit and work together. It's kind of why I like when we face some of these teams that do try different things. Like I liked when it was almost more helpful and informative for what Bud could potentially do if he wants to. It's like when we would face the Hornets last year, and they would always give us trouble, and we would finally break out the switching defense, and then we would start to play better. The instructive lesson from that is do, like you said, do we have to get punished first before we were willing to make the change, or can we be a little more proactive with it? There's these teams that we've been facing, where they've been playing smaller lineups. Like we saw Chris Middleton basically as a center lineup late in some of the games this week, which was, silly. And we're probably not going to see that in the playoffs. But, if nothing else, it at least gives us an opportunity to see what if that did work? Like, what if that was gangbusters? But it does feel like you were saying, these all feel incredibly reactive. Like they're all feel reactive. And in the playoffs, you do have to be reactive. But the regular season, I feel like you should be having a proactive approach to trying to create and test new ideas so that when the playoffs come and you have to be reactive, you'll be in a more successful place to be able to implement those different processes and your players will be more comfortable with them.
Yeah, and like you said, it's not even like it's also even small reactions like, okay, we're struggling a little bit. Maybe Giannis can play more than 10 minutes and like through three quarters or wherever it is. Like small stuff like that even could be changes. And again, this is the issue with having such a successful team is like it feels like every criticism like, yeah, but we're 35-6. I'm like, yes, yeah. I'm like totally aware that the Bucks are really good this season, but we would be doing a disservice to ourselves and how much goddamn time we spend watching this team totally own opponents if we didn't say like, okay, you know what, Coach Bud, all credit, like, you know, the one thing, obviously, this guy created a really amazing scheme for the way this team plays. Like, we have the third best offense in the league and the best defense in the league. Like, you cannot deny those facts. However, we've seen last season and we've seen at times this season, and we saw when he was with Atlanta, like when, was it the 15-16 year where they got the first seed? Whatever, like that wasn't a fluke. Like that was a talented team, and he had a system, again, that really took advantage of the roster. And then they crashed out of the playoffs again because whether it was like LeBron James just totally decimating them or whatever the deal was, we've seen it happen time and time again where he puts together a really awesome system and he puts his players in good positions, and theoretically the players should be able to handle it from there on out. Like they're all talented enough, but there's a reason why you have a coach on the rod, like as part of the team. Like he has to take the reins. Yes, it's really helpful that you can put your players in positions and trust them to make the right decision. But they're like, you have your third party perspective. Like you're sitting outside of the game. You're not in the action. You can observe things that are happening and make changes. And that's just not something he does all that often, which is why, like, even when the Bucks get totally blown out or it's like a tough outing, or even the back-to-back against the Spurs, like I said, it's interesting because that it forces his hand. Like he has no choice. Or like when there's an injury, like obviously you never hope for anybody to be injured, but if somebody goes out, you're like, oh, finally, okay, we're gonna see if Dante is okay as like a point guard. Like how does that work? So it's just, we have to hope things force his hands, which is probably not something that we should be really happy about. Whatever, even for a team that's 35-6.
Yeah, it's sort of that thought. It's like when Pau Gasol got injured last year, and it was like, well, thank God, now he can't play Pau Gasol.
Yeah,
because he's not going to help us.
And there's even like other stuff too. It's like, outside of Bud, it's like, okay, so Brook Lopez, he's shooting a little bit like a sack of potatoes from three this year. Like that's concerning because it's so critical. But maybe Bud will run him in the paint, and he seems to be doing more of that. But even then, it's still not like a lot of the possession. So even when he has like evidence this guy is struggling, but we have to have him out there because he's so good defensively. Like let's there was like the Houston Rockets game to start the season, and after that it's just like occasional Brook will be in the paint. And to Bud's credit, he's made that change, but it took a while to get there, even with Brook struggling from three offensively, which is theoretically so critical to how the team plays.
Yeah, and I don't watch enough Raptors games to be able to say whether Nick Nurse, puts these wholesale changes in and runs them for a huge amount of time or whatever. But that just seems like his philosophy. So I want to move on and talk a little bit just about if there's is there a trend for you, Riley, given that you feel a little bit worse, that has you most concerned about this team?
Yeah, trend for me, and I just tweeted about it a little bit before we recorded, is literally all the other role players shooting from three, and this is like the live by the three, die by the three. I'm not worried. Like this is like last season. If there's going to be a wall and Giannis is going to struggle to get through the wall because there's 4 200+ pound dudes that are in his way, that's understandable. It's going to come down to literally everybody else on the roster to hit their shots. And for the most part, they've been okay. But over like the past 10 games, is like Wesley Matthews shooting 20% from three. Dante was like 24%, I think. Sterling might have been a little bit better. I'm trying to like look through. Pat Connaughton was like in the 20 percentiles. Ersan, I think, was in the 45, so that's pretty high. And obviously George Hill's shooting out of his mind. But my biggest concern, and it's not the end of the world because they're still like 3-point shooting is just kind of that way, but they're still almost like bottom 2/3 of the league in 3-point percentage. Part of that is Brook not playing well, and part of that is Giannis still figuring out his 3-point percentage. But when you isolate those guys off, everybody else is like just okay. And if they're going to be just okay from three, I can already like imagine in my mind another series where Giannis is having trouble around the wall. Eric switched off for whatever reason, and everybody else is like, okay. And there's Wesley Matthews doing 3 step backs, and he airballed again, or whatever it is. So that would be probably the most concerning, quote unquote, trend. And it's tough to really nail it down because it's cyclical, but that's something I would keep an eye on.
What do you think if I gave you? Do you think the team's 3-point percentage as a whole is better or worse than what they shot last year?
That's tough. I would say I'd have to I'm trying to not look at the stats. I would say maybe it's worse. I'm going to say slightly worse than last year.
Okay, it's the exact same. Literally the exact same
great.
percentage.
Awesome.
Right? So I know I felt bad when you were really having trouble figuring out which way to go. But that surprised me. I was a little surprised by that.
Yeah, but so the issue then is is it the exact same because Giannis is shooting slightly better to offset the fact that Brook isn't shooting? My nightmare scenario, as much as I love Giannis taking the 3, and obviously it's helpful, how many teams are going to be content with okay, we'll just let Brook, Giannis, and Eric shoot as many 3s as they want, and we just see the entire season drain away through that? That's a legitimate concern to me because it feels like that's something opponents could really key on because those 3 guys are, I mean, thank goodness Giannis, we can call him a shooter reliably where you can ride that through a series. I really don't think so. And so that's something to worry about as well.
Well, I think it is going to come down to that, don't you think? I mean,
yeah, 100%.
That is what this is going to be. And it's going to be dependent on, can Eric Bledsoe not shoot 17% from 3-point land? What time of salves can Bud find for that? Pat Connaughton is shooting 28.9% from 3. Brook Lopez, for me, the biggest concern has been his offensive regression. A bit surprising to me, particularly given the fact that, yes, he was at an all-time volume last year, but he's pretty similar to what he was shooting last year, and it just does not seem to be falling for him at the same sort of rate. So trying to find ways for him to be more successful, and teams still seem to be respecting him at least a little bit out to that distance, but come playoff time, like you said, I think teams will be more than content. That's what the Sixers did on Christmas Day. They said, Giannis, yeah, you can shoot your 3. And when the first one doesn't fall, the second one doesn't fall, the third and fourth one don't fall, well then, I don't know, what is Giannis going to start doing in the playoffs? And there he just kept shooting it, and it shot us to the point where we ended up losing the game as well. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I agree completely. And would you say that's your most concerning trend, or do you have a different trend that's more concerning to you?
I think that's probably my most concerning trend. But I would also say, I'm glad when you started talking about why you were concerned, because I wanted to do this exercise also where we look at this roster, and I was looking at game 6 of the playoffs last year.
Yep.
Bud played 8 people.
Yep.
Who on this Bucks roster are going to be your 8? And I'll give you who he played last year.
Okay.
So it's game 6. As we all know, Mirotic gets benched because he sunk the whole playoff series.
Yeah. It's not great. Not great.
We have Chris, Giannis, the usual starters: Chris, Giannis, Brook, Malcolm, Eric, and then the bench players were George Hill, Ersan Ilyasova, and Pat Connaughton, who got about 10 minutes, and he was the lowest player.
Yep.
So on this team, if you had to make your 8-person rotation, who would it be?
So it's obviously going to be the 4 of the starters for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Giannis, Chris, Eric, Brook. That's just because each of them have the roles. You need them out there. George Hill, obviously 100% yes. He's playing out of his mind. You need a secondary ball handler to fill in case Eric, decides to essentially not exist anymore. Past that, probably Wes as a defender, even if he is come and go as a shooter. After that, it's a real, right? It's super open. I can be quiet about Robin Lopez because it doesn't seem like he's washed, but I'm not sure if that's going to be your guy. Obviously, DJ, the world could explode, and DJ's the only guy left, and he's not getting minutes. It's just not happening. Sterling seems like a similar thing. You were 100% correct that if you're going just looking at the minute allocation so far this season, if you're just going off of total minutes, it's going to include Wesley, George Hill, Pat Connaughton, Ersan, and Kyle Korver. Those are going to be your 3 end of the bench guys. Are going to be Pat, Ersan, and Kyle. 2 of those 3 are potentially horrendous defensive matchups, and you're just hoping they get hot from 3 and maybe, but you're going to be paying for it on the other end. So that's a really good point. That and even like Wes, like I said, like defensively, he's good. I'm some of the shot selection still. I'm like, what the hell are you doing, dude? And he's been better than he was early in the season, and even with Dante, like he's had a good season. Is he really like proven? Obviously not in the playoffs. Is that something we can rely on, or is that going to be a problem as well? So that's a well taken point that the rotation, even with how good they're playing, there's some question marks. And the biggest issue is even if you have like, oh, we should see if we can upgrade. Like it's going to be tough to find the right kind of guy out there and find the right matching salaries because Sterling doesn't make a lot, DJ doesn't make a lot. The first rounder from Indiana is helpful, but like you're gonna have to toss somebody else in there, and I don't know if like other teams are gonna be cool with Ursan or like what's gonna happen. So I think it's a double whammy where yes, they're really good. There are questions about the rotation, but your hands are a little tied with trying to find help at the right price to improve that rotation.
It's a really, really difficult question to answer. It's hard to ponder. It does make me feel like all of this like discussion we've had, and yes, like we said, caveats applied. This team is really good. They're 35-6. They've played really well, but realistically, we have to be prognosticating and looking towards the playoffs and figuring out what's going to be happening there because it does turn out to be a different game there. Unless you're in round one against Detroit and you're rolling over them.
Yeah. Whoever the first round opponent, like that's going to be the other thing. Like we're going to totally blow away whoever the 8 seed is. And he's like, dude, freaking told you, bro, we're the greatest team of all time. It's like, and then maybe we'll like lose a game in the second round. Like, oh, dude, we totally killed the Celtics again. Ha 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 ha. And then we'll get to the third round and then potentially get pants happens all over again. So I think it's 100% fair of everybody to be like, pump the brakes just a little bit, even as good as the team has been.
And this is going to be a simplification, but it does sometimes feel to me, Riley, like I was someone who I forget which side of the Brogdon debate are you on? You like really like Brogdon?
I'm pro Brogdon, yes.
Okay. I thought they would be fine with losing Brogdon, and I thought they could find ways. Presumably, would maybe make a trade and figure that stuff out. And I don't know if they will at this point. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But it almost feels like I'm just back to the simplification of. I don't like picking like replacing Brogdon was Wes Matthews, and then I'm like, oh, we need like Ursan to play 21 minutes in a pivotal game 6, and Pat Connaughton is our other guy that we rely on.
Yeah,
like, like it just doesn't feel like we have that the horses. And if Eric Bledsoe is a pumpkin, it's like it's a simplification, but it starts to go back to that point. Like this roster probably overall is worse than it was last year.
Yeah, I mean, and could you imagine if Dante wasn't having the that he's having? Yeah. Like how bad? Like again, we'd probably still win an S load of games, but like the fact that he has had a pulse for like almost 30 plus games now, huge godsend. Like, oh my God, could you? The rotation would be so many Pat Connaughton minutes, and like. I'm tired of the Brogdon debate. Like I've moved on for the Brogdon debate because it is what it is. I do tire though of people still this deep into the season. And again, this is like everybody like, oh, we've won so many games. Like, yes, that's so true. But it was, to me, it was never a debate of, and there's so many circumstances to it, but it's like, it was never like you need to have Eric or Malcolm in my mind. It's like we're just going to compare 1-to-1. Like, well, what's Eric doing this past week, and what did Malcolm do this week? Like, that's so reductive to a point where that is not the issue at hand here. Like, you want as much talent as on the roster as possible, especially if you're going to have a guy like Bud, where it's like, oh, everybody just go do whatever the hell you want. Like, okay, if we're going to do whatever the hell we want, let's have like talented players who are doing whatever the hell they want, and like. You can get by a lot with vet savvy, and it's really helpful that George Hill is playing as good as he is. But there's still other aspects, just like, man, to create something, do something a little bit different, especially if you're going to be doing whatever we want out here. Like, I'd rather guys who are really competent doing whatever the hell they want. Like that's what. And again, maybe Malcolm would be injured. He'd be making way too much money for what he's doing. But like, whatever, like comparatively, Chris is going to be making way too much money for what he does. Like, he's super valuable, but it's just the market determined that, and you have to pay the market price for that. So, and there's a lot of issues with that. And you're right that the rotation's a little shallow, and maybe maybe, and we're really hoping this is the case. Maybe Eric has like his Kyle Lowry season where he actually breaks out in the playoffs, and it's a total non-issue because, as with everything, this team comes down to Giannis is going to get his numbers, and is Chris or Eric going to get their numbers? Are they both going to get their numbers? Or neither of them going to get their numbers? Or is only one of them? Because those three options determines how hard of a slog it's going to be for the team. If both of them are hitting, life is so much easier. Like it's no problem at all. If one of them is struggling, as they are wont to do inconsistently every once in a while, then it's going to be a struggle. And if that's the case, that puts a lot of pressure on the rest of the roster to perform. And like you said, it's a weaker roster than last year, and it's open questions once we get to the playoffs between that and the coaching, how that's going to play out.
Well, okay, and realistically, just to sort of give my view on the who the eight people would be, I would do the 4 stars that you talked about locked in.
Yeah,
I think it's going to be Wes Matthews.
Yep.
It's going to be George Hill. Ersan's going to play, and I think Dante's their swing guy, and then that's it.
Man, I'm really worried about those center minutes because, like, we've run Giannis at center a little bit, but like, I don't know. That's a really tight rotation. I have questions about, and the issue is, like we've talked about before, Giannis is only averaging 30.9 minutes. Like, at what point is Bud going to tighten up that rotation? Because it felt like last year, deep into the playoffs, he had a really long rotation as well. So even if those are your 8 guys, how long until we get to those 8 guys, like as the guys, before we stop running everybody else out there?
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to our point that we don't see the center Giannis lineup that much. And I mean, maybe we should. I mean, God, Lord knows we don't need to see center Ersan minutes. Please, just
so center Chris minutes. We need more center Chris minutes.
Spare us those. But I mean, Ersan playing 21 minutes last year. I mean, he was fine. He was fine in the playoffs and everything. But I mean, we just saw him get routinely roasted by equally old man Gay. Over and over on the block. Like, teams they're gonna be able to find weaknesses and hit that stuff. And I mean, realistically, it is going to come down to, I think, since the swing players, we don't know. Dante DiVincenzo is really unproven. We'll see if he's hitting his shot in that series. It might come down to that. It's going to come down to whether Eric Bledsoe can, the same debate we've been having for all of time, if he's going to have his Kyle Lowry season. And I mean, at some point, it's going to depend on can Giannis Antetokounmpo lift the team on his back even further. Yeah, he played he played well in the playoffs, but realistically, he didn't play well enough in the Raptors series. He shot 7 for 18 in that game 6. He was 5 of 10 from the free throw line. That's been an issue for him all year. He'll have to elevate his game too, if we're being honest with ourselves.
Yeah, the point about the free throw percentage, that's another thing that I'm concerned about. Like 61% from the free throw line, and I would have to look at what his playoffs number were last year. Here, I can probably just scroll down, but like that's another thing that slightly worried about in the playoffs. If it's like, because it's going to be tight and it's probably going to be a lot of Giannis at the line. And there are games where he's really good from the line, and it's games like, oh my God, I cannot believe this is happening right now. Like, we are losing this lead right now because Giannis cannot hit a free throw for his life. And that's yet another small thing where in the course of the season, not that big of a deal, but over a 7-game sample size, that could be problematic.
Yeah, well, and especially on the back of that Warriors game where they started to do the hack Giannis strategy.
Yeah, I'm surprised more teams actually haven't gone to that, to be honest. Like didn't the Spurs did in the home game prior to earlier this week? I think they did a little hack Giannis as well. It's like I'm surprised teams haven't really tried that a little bit more. Maybe 60% is enough, but to me, he hasn't proven nearly enough to be consistent enough a free throw shooter this season to not try to do that.
Have you? I haven't read any like data whether that like whole Haka strategy has fully, like, if it's super viable or not. Like I haven't read. I don't recall reading like a definitive article on that.
It feels like because it's not something teams do all that often, it must be pretty league wide that every once in a while you can bust it out, but unless it's like a desperate situation where you're just really trying to claw back, like at the end of a game and it's sort of close and you can kind of force a bad free throw shooter to the line, I can't imagine it's viable throughout the course of an entire game because obviously dudes are going to rack up fouls, or a guy might have an okay shooting night from the free throw line. So I'm sure it's okay in moments, but probably not something that's valuable over the course of 48 minutes.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a lot of
doom and gloom. Again, we should counter all this by saying this team is really, really good. Like top 3 offense, top defense. the scheme works really, really well for how the team plays. We've had guys like Sterling steps up every once in a while. Dante has been really good. George Hill, really good. Giannis matching his MVP numbers from last year, even if he's kind of struggled a little bit these past couple of weeks. Chris been really, really good from injury. Eric really, like, there's a lot of good things to be happy about. The question is, does that hold up in the playoffs? And I don't think we have an answer to that just yet.
Yeah, not quite yet. I was looking at one other thing I was curious about. I feel like in years past we used to always talk about how is this team, performing in the clutch and that kind of stuff. I haven't really looked at those numbers that much this year. So the Bucks are third in the league in terms of net rating in clutch minutes, which is of course a game where it's within 5 points in the last 5 minutes of the game. But I was very intrigued by this, Riley. The Bucks have played, unsurprisingly, the least amount of clutch minutes in the league, 38 minutes, on pace for the least amount of clutch minutes that I could find in a season in NBA.com's database, which goes back to like 96, 97. So the last time a team played, like the fewest minutes I was able to find was outside of a lockout or shortened season, was Golden State played 95 clutch minutes in 2014-15 and 100 in 2016-17. Yeah. So just like goes to show how much the Bucks are absolutely blasting opponents this season, that they aren't even really facing close scenarios.
Yeah. It's a good point, and it's positive in that you can finally give guys rest. It doesn't have to be as much of a grind, but it's a negative insofar as you're not forced against the wall to really, quote unquote, prove it, like kind of deal with that. And that kind of even goes further, like, if they don't, are they able to switch it on in like really tight situations? And I don't know, there's just a lot of open questions. We'll talk about it probably as the season goes on, but that's another thing where it's like, no, I don't prefer close games. I prefer blowouts, even if it kind of makes the regular season a little bit boring. But every once in a while, if they have to sweat it out, that I don't mind that whatsoever. If they still get the win, even if it's a loss, if they have to sweat it out, that's valuable in its own right.
Yeah, plenty of interesting questions to ponder. I think, like Riley said, to counteract doom and gloom, this team is awesome. I freaking love watching this team every single night. They are spectacular. I'm so excited that they are 35-6. But this is a good point to sort of take stock of where we're at and look forward the halfway point of the season. So I'm glad we were able to do that. We were going to talk about trades and all-stars and stuff, but I think we'll just table that for the weeks ahead and move along to our potpourri, Riley.
Yes, and this week I am in charge of rapid fire. So just a couple of quick ones here. So first one for you: does Giannis have a back injury?
Yes. Maybe like as much as like I have a back injury after like working out and stuff. Like his back's kind of hurt. Holy crap.
Are you on team? Because I've seen a lot of people like, okay, just shut him down for 3 months. Like obviously not that extreme, but I've seen a lot of people advocate like shutting him down for a couple of weeks. Do you think the Bucks should look into that, even if he's only like whatever? If he's going at 95%, do you think that's something they should load manage and just like sit him completely, or are you okay with how they're approaching it?
I don't know. I haven't looked how much Kawhi plays per game, but it feels like the Bucks like have their own sort of way of trying to do load management, which is keep the players playing, but play them at lesser amounts. I mean, Giannis is barely playing in some of these games. So I'm kind of okay, and I feel absolutely like I'm actually in no way should I even comment on it. Like I have no idea. I just trust what they're doing.
I just figured since you're a resident podcast doctor, you might have an insight there. I think conspiracy theory. The owners don't want to pay the fines for not playing stars on national TV games, so they told Bud to just play the guys like 10 minutes in big games and just load manage. But, we'll talk about that later on. Second question, do New Year's make you celebratory or reflective?
Oh.
More celebratory or reflective? Because usually I'm guessing most people are like both.
Oh, I would say more celebratory. I barely even think about the last year. I just start drinking.
Like a true Wisconsinite. Will one, both, or neither of Brooke/Wes match their career average from 3? So far this year, this is going to be a climb. Brooke, 29.3% this year. His career average is 34.1. Wes, 35.6%, and his career is 38.1 from 3. We're pretty much at the halfway point, so they have 41 games to up that if they're going to fix it.
I'd say neither will.
Okay. And to Wes's credit, he's not too far off, like 3 percentage points, if it's even a little bit better. Brooke, I don't think there's any way he's going to make it, which is really unfortunate. I know we said we're not going to talk about All Stars, but actually, my quick question was the over under on 2.5 All Stars for Milwaukee. Do you think we're going to get 3 or just 2? Because I think it's going to be 2. The question is Eric still.
Oh, I would say under 100%.
Yeah, I don't see that happening unless everyone's going to be like, look, if your team's on pace to win 85 games out of 82, you have to have more than 2 All Stars. But I don't think that's going to be the case because just they don't play
So
nearly
yeah,
enough.
the East is really good too. Well, I guess that doesn't always matter anymore, right?
Yeah, people like look back like remember when the Atlanta Hawks won 30 games and they had 7 All-Stars or whatever because like Kyle Korver got voted in or whatever the deal was. Like it'll be that all over again. And then the final question, who will have more minutes, total minutes played this season, DJ Wilson or Dragan Bender? And for comparison's sake, let me just pull up their totals here. So far through 41 games, Dragan has played only 29 minutes. DJ has played 218 so far, which seems I have no idea where the hell those 218. Now, to Dragan's credit, he's been killing it in the G League, just totally murking dudes down there. So there's it feels like they're sort of grooming him a little bit now. And we should also say he did get his contract guaranteed for the rest of the season. So there lots of Dragan going on heading forward. But 218 versus 29, but seems like for whatever reason they're grooming Dragan a lot more than they are DJ.
I would go DJ. I think the only way Dragan wins is if he gets traded.
That's supposed to, how funny would that be? DJ gets traded and we still don't get enough Dragan minutes. Like it feels that's really not super annoying. It feels like just Bud does not believe in DJ, which is whatever. It's fine. It's like offensively, DJ is still kind of a mess, so I understand it. But like when Ersan is out there getting the skates put on his feet and he just cannot keep up with the dudes, like, can we try DJ just like a few minutes in real minutes, please? Like, it would be great. So, but I probably agree that DJ is too much of a commanding lead at this point.
That was lovely, Riley. Thank you for putting those together. I like
No
I like the statistical element to them as well, a little bit higher level than some of the stuff I come up with.
I definitely just looked on Basketball Reference for 3 seconds, but I do appreciate that. Thank you for the credit.
All right, I'm gonna have you lead us into the next segment. It's time for Vulture Talk, Riley.
Yes, it is. And this week, could you ask for more controversy? It feels like there are 2 teams we talk about every week, and those 2 teams are the Golden State Warriors and the New York Knicks. And of course, the Bucks played the Warriors this past week, so we couldn't go by without some controversy. And the controversy, I think you aptly titled it in the outline, the "Come On Man" heard round the world. So for context's sake, I believe it was after the game, Giannis went up to Steph Curry, who reports, I haven't seen it yet, but it seems like we're just a little bit away from Steph Curry also being a father figure for Giannis, like everybody else in the league. The Giannis and Steph Curry meet up. They shared some words, and some professional lip readers determined that Steph Curry said to Giannis, "Come on, man, let's do it." As they departed, Giannis kind of just walked away. Apparently, according to Steph, the next day they were talking about PUBG, a online battle royale like shooter game. I have my doubts about that. And then even more drama. Apparently, Steph Curry left Giannis a signed jersey and a quote unquote long note. Now, long note seems to be subjective. Like, was it long for a Steph Curry note, or was it long like multiple pages? So there was just a confluence of factors, and it didn't help that after the fact, the like FS Wisconsin equivalent for the Warriors was tweeting pictures of Giannis like photoshopped into the really crappy mid 2000s Warriors jerseys, which is a strange take on their part. But a lot of drama around the Warriors this week, and a lot of other like pieces from their local paper talking about here's how we can get Giannis. So the full court press is on for the Warriors to get Giannis.
So we left him a signed Steph Curry jersey?
Yeah, how lame of a gift is that? I would be insulted if another player gave me that. Like, what? Like, this is how you're going to... Yes, he left him, I think, a signed jersey of himself and a note saying something. We don't know what the something is, but that was what the report was after the game, that he left Giannis.
Wow. That's scintillating. That's some good stuff. I hadn't heard the other parts about the long note and the jersey.
Yeah,
I do have to say...
Yeah,
go
for it. No, go for it.
I mean, I do have to say, if like, I'm sure he's joking, all that stuff, and the people who do get worked up, I know it's frustrating, all that kind of stuff. But also Giannis, didn't Giannis do this like to Anthony Davis earlier this year? Do like when he was there in Milwaukee, or like when they faced
last year when he was going through the like, please trade me, and Giannis, he was joking. He was like, come on, dude, come to Milwaukee. We're gonna make it happen. So
yeah.
So it's definitely not something Giannis is afraid to do. And it's like, I can't remember. Didn't it like start with Steph Curry? I should say a couple years ago, like. Steph picked Giannis, so then Giannis picked Steph to like return the favor or whatever, and everyone's like, "Wow,
oh he picked the best player."
Yeah, well, exactly. Like, oh my god, I think Steph Curry might be Giannis's dad. Like, I think that was definitely that's going to be just my running joke because that's the angle everyone's doing. So, I'm not too worried about it. Like, I don't know, whatever. Like, it's cool that they did that, and it's cool that Giannis is like. Cool with other players. I don't clutch my pearls at night thinking about Giannis to the Warriors just yet. So
yeah, well, it's gonna stink when he goes there.
Yeah, man, that would be how brutal would that shit be? Oh my god, it would be a knife to the heart. But we have 2 years before that happens, so hopefully we get a championship before then.
All right, thank you, Riley. One of my favorite segments of the week. That one was some great fodder. All right, let's talk briefly about the week ahead, make some predictions, then we'll get on out of here. So the Bucks are home against the hapless New York Knicks. I expect that to be an absolute blowout, man.
Hopefully we get some vulture talk with it as well.
Yes, yeah, we can only hope. And we get it's the Celtics are on Thursday, big game, and that Celtics game is sandwiched between two New York teams. The Brooklyn Nets are on Saturday. I can't remember if Kyrie will be back or not. Let's hope so.
I think they said he was going to, I think they said maybe this next week he's coming back. So I think there's a possibility he's returning.
Oh, that would be great. Well, it's always fun to remember Kyrie fondly wanting to guard Giannis in the playoffs last year. That was really great. Huge favor done by him. But I am most obviously excited for the Celtics game. First matchup since that loss that the Bucks suffered at their hands earlier this year. It should be a really interesting matchup, Riley, especially the Celtics have some interesting like wing small personnel. So, probably going to be most interested on how Giannis can attack their inside with their somewhat weakened front court from who they had guarding Giannis last year.
Yeah, and I'd have to go back and relook at that game. Was that like a typical, obviously early season, the Bucks weren't playing like super duper, they were still kind of figuring it out, but was that a game where Giannis did well and everybody else is just kind of blah? They kind of, I'd have to go.
I'm pulling it up now. I'm pulling up the box score. Yeah, so Giannis had 22 points, 5 assists, 14 rebounds. So Chris Middleton was good that game. 26 points, 10 of 15. Eric Bledsoe took just 8 shots.
Just typical Eric. It's like there's a tight game or a loss. It's like, all right, just look at how many shots Eric got up, and that's going to pretty much be your bellwether for whether or not it was bad because he was not getting shots or just everybody was struggling.
Now, here's one thing. Dante did not play.
Critical. Yeah. And to Eric's credit, I think he was still coming back from the rib injury. So the whole start of the season, I discount that. No, I agree that now what I'm going to do, this is my New Year's resolution, and I'm not a huge New Year's resolution, but I'm going to try and prevent talking super mad trash about all the other Eastern Conference teams because what's really interesting to me, and it's not anything like scientific or anything, but here are the other top teams in the East: Miami, Boston, Toronto, Philadelphia, Indiana, and then Orlando and Brooklyn. Teams that have given the Bucks issues this year: Miami, Boston, Philadelphia. Toronto, not so much, but we've seen that they can be a problem every once in a while. So the other 4 of the top 5 teams in the East all give Milwaukee fits and starts from time to time. So every time we play them, I'm not going to talk trash. I'm just going to be interested. What does Bud do to be able to adjust for the fact that they might have given him props in the past, if he adjusts whatsoever?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I would like to also similarly do the same, unless it's the Sixers and I'm talking with my friends, then I'll do it because they deserve it. But other than that, it has been really interesting. Won't work very well with our newly minted intro for the show, where I'm pretty sure we call out Philadelphia, Toronto, and Boston. But
yeah. Unfortunately, like we said at the start of the podcast, everything associated with this thing does not age well, except for its podcasters. We're all aging wonderfully. So, but the content of the podcast does not age well. So it's fitting that the bumper at the start of the podcast also does not age well.
Yeah, a great point though to talk about how those teams have clearly given the Bucks some issues. we'll be very interested to see if they can get one in the ledger against the Boston Celtics this week. So, yeah, any predictions for how they do this week?
I will say 3-0, but I have a feeling that the game against Boston is going to be pretty freaking tight because obviously last playoffs during that series totally blew the doors off of them after the first game, but this is the typical, like, they have a really good coach and they have decent personnel, and so it's up to, like, does that coach figure out some sort of wrinkle that throws the Bucks off enough, or are the Bucks talented enough to, like, it doesn't matter one way or the other? So I think it'll be tight. They'll get the win, but hopefully there'll be some lessons for Bud to take away from it. Open question whether or not there actually are.
Yeah, very interested to see that. I'm going to go 3-0 as well. This one, of course, the Celtics game will be at home. So that's a bonus for the Bucks this week as opposed to their last one. So I'm going to guess 3-0. We'll see how they fare. And we will also hope that you have a great, fantastic week ahead. Thankfully, we won't have to stay up quite so late for Bucks games this week. I'm going to quite enjoy that and getting to bed on time. So subscribe to the podcast, share it with your friends. Check out all of our stuff on brewhoop.com. Quick plug for an excellent article that Patrick Casey put up on our website, basically uncovering a previously unknown, at least to me and I think a lot of people, Giannis and his mother performance in a Australian movie, Dead Europe. Really awesome stuff. Check that out on brewhoop.com. And then, of course, read Riley's Monday Morning Media Roundup and everything else we got on the site. So for Adam and Riley, I'm signing off. Thanks for listening.